The morning air in Minneapolis was heavy with July heat, the kind that pressed down on the city even before the clock struck 9. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen blinds of the Thompson house, striping the worn oak table where Linda sat with her coffee. She stirred it absent-mindedly, her thoughts wandering, when Charles walked in, wearing the look of a man who had rehearsed something important. He carried an envelope in his hand, crisp and white, so out of place against the fading plaid of his shirt. "Linda," he said with unusual cheer, sliding the envelope across the table toward her. "I've got a surprise for you." Linda looked at it, then at him. Surprises weren't Charles's style. He was a man of habits, predictable, practical, often stingy when it came to gestures of affection. She peeled the flap open, unfolded the glossy papers inside, and froze. Cruise tickets. Not just any trip, but a week-long Alaskan cruise leaving from Seattle. She blinked, certain she had misread. An Alaskan cruise? Charles smiled broadly, his eyes fixed on her face as if waiting for a performance. "You've been talking about needing a change, a break from the routine. I thought this would be perfect. Fresh air, glaciers, the works. You deserve it." Before Linda could respond, footsteps padded into the kitchen. Her son Daniel, tall and lean from his hours at the computer lab, glanced at the tickets in her hands and raised his eyebrows. "Wow," he said with a half-smirk. "Dad's in a generous mood. What's the occasion? Did someone win the lottery?" Sarah followed close behind, her hair pulled into a messy bun, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She slid into the chair beside her mother and leaned over to peek. "A cruise," she said, her tone caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "Seriously?" Charles chuckled, trying to keep it light. "What's with the suspicion? Can't a man treat his wife once in a while?" The children exchanged a quick glance, one of those silent communications siblings shared. Neither of them had grown particularly close to Charles over the years. He wasn't cruel, but there was always a distance, a formality in how he dealt with them. He was their stepfather, after all, and though they coexisted without open conflict, there had never been warmth. Linda forced a smile, tracing the bold blue lettering on the tickets. The idea of standing on the deck of a ship, gazing at icy fjords, might have once thrilled her. But this felt wrong. Too sudden, too extravagant, too out of character. Charles hated spending money unnecessarily, yet here he was, gifting her a luxury cruise without any prior hint of planning. She lifted her eyes to him, studying his expression. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something tight in the set of his jaw, something rehearsed about the way he spread his hands, as if to say, "See? Look how thoughtful I am." "You're quiet," Charles said, a trace of impatience seeping into his voice. "It's just unexpected," Linda answered softly. She set the tickets back on the table, careful not to let her hands tremble. "I can't remember the last time we took a trip like this." "That's the point," he said, leaning forward, his tone almost persuasive. "It's time. You need this. Trust me, Linda, you're going to love it. Trust me." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Linda sipped her coffee to hide her unease, the bitter taste grounding her. Sarah frowned, her sketchbook forgotten. "It's just strange, Dad. You've never even talked about cruises before." "Yeah," Daniel added dryly. "Last week you said vacations were a waste of money." Charles's smile flickered, then snapped back into place. "Well, maybe I changed my mind. Is that so hard to believe?" The children shrugged, unwilling to argue further, but Linda could feel the tension under the surface. She reached out, patting Sarah's hand, and tried to end the conversation with a light laugh. "Maybe your father's right. Maybe it's time I did something for myself." Charles leaned back, satisfied, and the matter seemed closed. But as the children went about their morning, and the kitchen filled with the clatter of plates and the hum of small talk, Linda's mind remained fixed on that envelope. When she glanced at her husband again, she caught a fleeting expression cross his face, gone in an instant, but chilling all the same. A gleam of calculation, a sharpness in his eyes that didn't belong to a man planning a romantic surprise. Her heart gave a slow, heavy thud. The unease she felt wasn't baseless. Her instincts whispered that something about this gift wasn't meant for her joy at all. Linda folded the tickets carefully and slipped them back into the envelope, her fingers cold despite the heat outside. She smiled faintly, meeting Charles's gaze, but in the pit of her stomach a knot tightened. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The July afternoon hung heavy over Minneapolis, the kind of heat that clung to curtains and slowed every sound. Linda had retreated upstairs, hoping for a quiet hour with her laundry and her thoughts. The whir of the dryer masked most of the household noise, but then, faintly through the half-closed door of Charles's office, she caught his voice. It wasn't unusual for him to take calls at home, but there was something urgent in his tone that made her pause with a folded shirt in her hands. She set the laundry aside and moved closer, each step cautious on the hallway rug. His door was only partly shut, enough for sound to slip through, enough for her to catch words that froze the blood in her veins. The policy will cover everything. 7 figures easy. No questions asked if it looks like an accident. Her breath snagged in her throat. She pressed her palm against the wall, steadying herself. He was talking about insurance, life insurance. Her insurance. Charles's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial. On the cruise. You know how these things go. Storm, rough waters, people fall overboard all the time. Tragic, but believable. By the time the Coast Guard investigates, she'll be gone, and I'll be a grieving husband cashing a check. Linda's heart hammered so loudly she feared he'd hear it through the wall. She backed up a step, but she couldn't stop listening, couldn't drag herself away from the sound of her own death being plotted like a business deal. Then came the second blow. A woman's name. Tiffany. Yes, Tiffany. Of course it'll be you. Once this is done, we can finally be together. You know, I've already pictured it, you walking into our house, no secrets, no pretending. Just us. The kids will move on eventually. Linda won't be around to get in the way. Linda clutched the doorframe, the weight of betrayal crashing over her. Tiffany, the young paralegal from his firm, the one with the too eager smile at holiday parties. She had noticed the glances before, brushed them off as harmless. Foolish. Her knees weakened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse right there in the hallway. But then Charles's laugh floated out, a low, satisfied chuckle that carried no love, only calculation. It jolted her back to herself, burning away the haze of disbelief. She could almost see it now. Charles standing on the deck of the ship, guiding her toward the railing with that same practiced smile, and then dark water swallowing her whole while he rehearsed his sorrow for the insurance adjuster. Linda staggered back into the laundry room, closing the door silently behind her. Her pulse raced, her hands trembled. But beneath the terror something new stirred, a sharp clarity, as if the floor had dropped out beneath her and revealed the truth at last. For years, she had accepted the quiet distance in their marriage, the absence of tenderness, the practical way Charles measured love in chores done and bills paid. She had told herself she could endure it, but this was no longer about endurance. This was survival. She sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing her fists against her knees until they stopped shaking. She could not let him see fear. Fear was exactly what he counted on. A gullible, trusting wife who would follow him onto that ship without a second thought. Not anymore. Tears welled but did not fall. She drew a long, deliberate breath, forcing the air into her lungs until her chest steadied. If Charles thought she was weak, he would soon learn otherwise. Linda rose, straightened the folded laundry into neat stacks, and carried it downstairs as if nothing had happened. Charles's office door opened just as she passed the hallway. He stepped out, phone in hand, expression calm, even cheerful. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice smooth, betraying nothing. He nodded, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Just work." Nothing you need to worry about. She offered him a smile, light and convincing. Good. I'm glad you're keeping things in order before we leave. His eyes searched hers for a moment, as if testing her, then softened into that same counterfeit warmth he had worn at the kitchen table. Don't you worry, Linda. This trip is going to change everything. He turned away, humming under his breath, oblivious to the shift that had already begun inside her. Linda stood in the hallway, the envelope with cruise tickets still on the counter, and thought of the icy waters of Alaska. For him, they were supposed to be her grave. But in that moment, as the late afternoon sun burned hot against the glass, she made her decision. She would not be his victim. The next morning dawned heavy and gray, the kind of Midwestern summer day that promised storms by evening. Linda woke with Charles beside her, his steady breathing the sound of a man at peace, oblivious to the storm already brewing in his wife's mind. She slipped out of bed, quietly dressed, and left the house with a folder of papers tucked into her purse. Her destination was a small law office downtown, tucked between a cafe and a row of aging storefronts. Rebecca Harris greeted her at the door with a surprised but warm smile. Once, years ago, they had been neighbors and close friends. Rebecca had gone on to become a respected attorney. Linda had faded into the routines of marriage. Now, fate brought them back together. "Linda," Rebecca said, ushering her inside. "It's been too long. What brings you here?" Linda hesitated only a second before speaking. "I need a will, Rebecca, and I need it done quickly." The lawyer studied her with sharp eyes. "A will? That's serious. What's going on?" Linda shook her head. "I can't explain everything right now, but I need to make sure Daniel and Sarah are protected. If anything happens to me, they must have everything that belongs to me. And there's money, savings Charles doesn't know about. It needs to be placed where only they can reach it." Rebecca's brow furrowed, but she didn't press. She pulled a legal pad across the desk. "All right, tell me exactly what you want, and I'll make it happen." For the next hour, Linda signed papers, detailed accounts, and set up instructions. A safe deposit box at the bank. Copies of documents sealed and notarized. The practical, methodical steps of a woman preparing for the worst, but also arming herself for the fight ahead. When it was done, Rebecca leaned back. "Linda, I don't know what you're mixed up in, but I can see you're scared. Whatever it is, be careful." Linda managed a small smile. "I will. Thank you, Rebecca. More than you know." That afternoon, she drove across town to a diner that smelled of coffee and fried eggs, where a man in his 50s waited in a corner booth. Michael Grant looked exactly as she remembered from her son's high school football games years ago. Broad-shouldered, a little grayer, but with eyes that missed nothing. Once a police investigator, now a private detective, he had the kind of quiet authority Linda knew she could trust. "You said it was urgent," he began once she slid into the booth. "It is." Linda lowered her voice. "Charles is planning something. He wants me gone, permanently, and he's not hiding it from his mistress." Michael didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small notebook. "Tell me everything." She recounted what she had overheard. The insurance, the cruise, Tiffany's name whispered like a promise of a new life. With each word, Michael's jaw tightened. "Do you have proof?" he asked. "Not yet. That's why I need you." He tapped his pen against the table. "All right, I'll start shadowing him. Check his calls, his meetings, see who he talks to. If he's planning something on that cruise, we'll know before he does." For the first time in days, Linda felt the faintest stirrings of control. "Thank you, Michael. I can't go to the police yet. He'd deny everything, make me look paranoid. But if I can bring evidence, then you'll have him cornered," Michael finished for her. "Don't worry, Linda. I've seen men like Charles before. They always think they're smarter than everyone else. That arrogance will be his downfall." By the time Linda returned home, evening shadows had crept across the neighborhood. Charles was in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, pouring himself a drink. When he saw her, he smiled in a way that might have once been charming. "There you are," he said. "Out running errands?" Linda slipped her purse onto the counter and gave him the sweetest smile she could muster. "Just a few things. I can't stop thinking about that cruise, Charles. It really was thoughtful of you." He looked pleased, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I told you, Linda. You're going to love it. It'll be the trip of a lifetime." She kissed his cheek lightly, her mask flawless. Inside, though, her mind was steel. He thought she was the same trusting wife, grateful for his generosity. He had no idea she had drawn her battle lines, signed her will, armed herself with allies. Let him believe she was naive. Let him think the game was his. Because when the time came, he would discover that Linda Thompson was no victim at all. The smell of roasted chicken filled the Thompson kitchen, mingling with the faint notes of rosemary and garlic. Outside, the Minneapolis evening stretched long and golden, summer light pouring through the wide windows. Linda set the last dish on the table, her movements careful, deliberate. Dinner with Daniel and Sarah had become rare occasions since they both lived on their own. But tonight, she had asked them to come home. She told them it was simply for a family meal. The truth was heavier. Daniel arrived first, still in his button-down from work, his tie stuffed into his pocket. He kissed his mother on the cheek, murmuring, "Smells amazing, Mom." Sarah followed soon after, hair loose, a sketchbook slung under her arm as always. She wrapped Linda in a warm hug before setting her things down. When they all sat at the table, conversation began easily enough. Work projects, Sarah's new design clients, Daniel's long hours at the firm. Charles was absent, caught up in some late business meeting, and the absence gave the evening an unexpected comfort. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, just Linda and her children, laughter sparking between bites. But Linda knew she hadn't gathered them for nostalgia. As the plates emptied and the light dimmed, her pulse quickened. The words she needed to say pressed against her chest, each one heavy with fear. She set down her fork and looked at them both, her expression suddenly serious. "Daniel, Sarah, I need to tell you something important." They glanced up, surprised by the tone. Sarah's brow furrowed. Daniel leaned back, uneasy. "If anything ever happens to me," Linda began slowly, choosing each word with care, "you need to know that everything I own, everything that is mine will come to you. The documents are already in place. The will is signed. There's a safe deposit box at the bank, and you'll find copies of everything you'll need." Daniel blinked, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about? Why would you even say that?" Sarah's hand stilled on her napkin. "You sound like you're preparing for," she swallowed, her voice soft, "for something terrible." Linda reached across the table, covering Sarah's hand with her own. "I'm healthy. I'm fine. But life is unpredictable. I don't want you caught unprepared if anything should happen." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't like you. You're scaring us. What's going on?" Her throat ached with the truth she longed to tell, but she couldn't risk it. If they knew about Charles's plans, they might act rashly, confront him, or worse, put themselves in danger. She forced a calm she didn't feel, keeping her voice even. "I just need peace of mind," she said gently. "There's money, too. Savings Charles doesn't know about. Enough to give you both stability, at least for a while. The account information is in the box. You'll find it if you ever need it." Sarah's eyes brimmed with worry. "Mom, why are you talking like this? Did someone threaten you?" Linda squeezed her hand and shook her head, smiling faintly though her heart was breaking. "No threats, just foresight. That's all." Daniel leaned forward, his voice firmer now. "If something's wrong, we deserve to know." For a long moment, Linda looked at her children, the people she loved most in the world. She wanted to tell them everything, that Charles was plotting her death, that Tiffany waited in the wings, that the cruise was nothing more than a staged grave. But she saw the fear already in their eyes, and she couldn't bear to deepen it. "Please," she whispered instead, "trust me. Just remember what I've told you, and know that I love you both more than anything." Silence fell across the table. Outside, the sky had darkened, the cicadas starting their nightly chorus. Sarah reached up and brushed away a tear, while Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, clearly unsettled. "Okay," Sarah said finally, her voice trembling. "We'll trust you, but promise us you'll be careful." Linda nodded, though inside, her fear gnawed sharper than ever. "I promise." They resumed their meal, but the warmth of earlier had faded. Conversation limped forward, forced, each of them weighed down by unspoken questions. Linda smiled where she could, laughed when appropriate, but deep inside, her dread coiled tighter. As the evening drew to a close and her children hugged her goodbye, Linda held them longer than usual, breathing in the comfort of their presence. She told herself she would see them again, that she would survive what was coming. But when the door shut and silence filled the house once more, she sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She had given them the tools to carry on without her. That knowledge was both a comfort and a torment. The fear was deeper now, sharper. Yet beneath it all, resolve glimmered. She would not leave them behind. The air in Seattle carried the sharp tang of salt water and diesel, thick with the noise of departure. At Pier 91, the cruise terminal bustled with activity, families shepherding children through security, retirees dragging wheeled suitcases, couples posing for photos beneath the towering shadow of the ship. The vessel itself loomed like a floating city, white decks stacked one atop the other, gleaming railings catching the late morning sun. To most, it promised escape and adventure. To Linda, it looked like the stage of a play whose script she already knew too well. Her suitcase rattled behind her as she moved with the crowd, each step steady though her stomach twisted with dread. The ticket folder in her hand felt heavier than it should have. Around her, laughter and chatter filled the air, but none of it touched her. She adjusted her sunglasses and inhaled deeply. Fear still gnawed at her ribs, but beside it, growing stronger each day, was resolve. If Charles wanted this cruise to mark her end, she would make it his undoing. Inside the terminal, lines wound around velvet ropes. Linda waited patiently, rehearsing her mask. She smiled politely at a family in front of her, nodded at a retired couple behind. Her movements were calm, her demeanor unremarkable, exactly what she wanted. When her documents were checked and her luggage tagged, she passed through security with ease. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of him, Michael Grant, clean-shaven, dressed in khakis and a windbreaker, the kind of outfit that screamed tourist. He held a guidebook in one hand, a camera slung over his shoulder, and a baseball cap pulled low. To anyone else, he was just another passenger ready to photograph glaciers. To Linda, he was the only anchor she had. Their eyes met briefly, no more than a fraction of a second. He gave the smallest of nods, then turned to adjust his camera strap, blending back into the crowd. Relief washed through her. She was not alone. Boarding the ship was like entering another world. The grand atrium soared above her, light pouring in from glass ceilings. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and a string quartet played near a sweeping staircase. Passengers gasped and pointed, awed by the luxury. Linda let herself appear impressed too, though inside her nerves were taut. She trailed with the others toward her stateroom, memorizing exits, staircases, the layout of corridors. Survival, she reminded herself, lay in paying attention. Her cabin overlooked the sea, a modest but comfortable space with pale wood finishes and a balcony that opened to the water. Setting her suitcase aside, Linda stepped out into the breeze. The Seattle skyline stretched behind them, cranes and ferries dotting the harbor, Mount Rainier faint in the distance. Soon all of it would be gone, replaced by endless water and sharp cliffs of ice. She gripped the railing, the air cool against her face. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find a stewardess, a young woman in a navy uniform with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Thompson. If you need anything, dial 0 from your phone. Lifeboat drill will begin at 4 o'clock sharp." Linda thanked her, exchanging a few light words, careful to seem like any other guest. When the stewardess left, Linda sat on the edge of the bed, rehearsing her role. Polite, curious, harmless. No one could suspect the battle waging beneath the surface. Later, on deck, she allowed herself to wander among the other passengers. She struck up a conversation with a grandmother from Ohio who proudly showed photos of her grandchildren, then chatted briefly with a newlywed couple taking their honeymoon. Each interaction was a shield, a way to blend in, to bury her fear under casual conversation. She laughed when appropriate, asked questions, let them see only a woman eager for the sights of Alaska. Michael lingered nearby at times, always in character, snapping photos of the harbor, asking staff about shore excursions. They never spoke directly, not yet. It was safer this way. Still, his presence calmed her. He was watching, listening, ready. As the afternoon waned, the ship's horn bellowed long and deep. The deck vibrated beneath her feet as the vessel pulled away from the pier, cutting slowly into Elliott Bay. Passengers lined the rails, waving to the city shrinking behind them, shouting goodbyes to family on the shore. Linda raised her hand, too, mimicking their joy, though no one waited for her on the dock. Her children were hundreds of miles away, and Charles, her husband, her would-be executioner, was still back in Minneapolis, waiting for the news that she had tragically disappeared. She pressed her fingers against the railing, the vibration of the ship humming through her bones. The knot of dread in her stomach remained, but it no longer paralyzed her. She had boarded this ship knowing the danger. Now she would walk its decks with open eyes. Linda turned from the water and let the sea, wind lift her hair. Around her, passengers chatted about excursions, whale-watching tours, glacier hikes. She smiled and joined in, hiding her terror in plain sight. The cruise had begun, so had her fight. By the third evening at sea, the ship had settled into its rhythm. The hallways hummed with the shuffle of passengers moving between dinner and shows. The air on deck carried a sharper chill now, a promise of the Alaskan wilderness that awaited them. Linda walked slowly along the upper promenade, her scarf wrapped tight around her neck, feigning the relaxed gaze of a tourist. Inside, her nerves coiled tighter with every passing hour. Michael kept his distance, always in character. At one moment, he was a tourist asking crew members about whale sightings. At another, a hobbyist fiddling with his camera tripod. They had yet to speak directly, but Linda knew he was close. That knowledge alone kept her steady. It was near midnight when it happened. Most passengers had retired to their cabins, leaving the upper deck hushed except for the thrum of engines and the crash of waves against steel. Linda leaned against the railing, her breath visible in the cold air, when a hesitant voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Thompson?" She turned. A young crewman stood a few feet away, his uniform jacket too large for his thin frame, his eyes shifting nervously toward the shadows. He couldn't have been older than 22. His name tag read Ethan. "Yes," she asked cautiously. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need to speak with you. Privately." Her pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to be wary, but there was something desperate in his expression. She nodded, and together they moved toward a quiet corner of the deck, hidden from the glow of the lounge windows. Ethan's hands shook as he spoke. "I shouldn't be saying this, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Your husband, he contacted me before the cruise, offered me money." Linda's throat tightened. "Money? For what?" He looked around once more before blurting it out. "To make it look like an accident. To make sure you went overboard." The world seemed to tilt, even though she had already known, already overheard. Hearing it spoken aloud by someone else made the danger all too real. Her fingers gripped the railing behind her. "And you agreed," she whispered. Ethan's face twisted with shame. "At first, yes. I needed the money. But I can't do it. I won't. I wanted you to know, so you can protect yourself. Please, you didn't hear this from me. If they find out I told you," a faint click interrupted them. Unseen in the shadows, Michael had positioned himself at just the right angle, a recorder in his jacket pocket capturing every word. He didn't approach, didn't reveal himself, but Linda knew he was there. Relief flickered beneath her fear. "Why now?" she asked Ethan softly. "Because he'll expect it soon," the young man said, his voice breaking. "The next few nights, when the waters get rough. That's when accidents happen." Linda's chest tightened, her breath shallow. The threat wasn't distant anymore. It was imminent. Charles's plan had a timeline, and she was living inside it. "Thank you," she said firmly, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. "You did the right thing. Keep your head down. Stay out of sight. I'll handle the rest." He nodded quickly, eyes darting with fear, then disappeared into the shadows as swiftly as he'd come. Linda stayed where she was, staring out at the dark expanse of ocean. The waves rolled endlessly, their white crests glowing faintly under the deck lights. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she had just heard. The enemy wasn't vague anymore. It had a schedule, a plan, accomplices. A soft shuffle drew her attention. Michael emerged from the shadows, careful and calm. He didn't speak at first, only showed her the device in his hand. The small red light glowed steady. "It's all here," he said quietly. "Every word. This will hold up." Linda exhaled, a tremor leaving her body. "So it's true. He's already bought help." Michael's gaze was steady, "And that help just became your ally. You're not alone in this." He slipped the recorder back into his pocket. "I'll get this to the captain, discreetly. He needs to know before Charles tries to move." She nodded, forcing herself to stand straighter. "Do it. The sooner he's aware, the safer everyone will be." Michael gave her a reassuring look before vanishing down the corridor, blending once more with the anonymity of the ship. Left alone on the deck, Linda pressed her palms against the railing and stared into the endless black horizon. The ship surged forward, slicing through the waves, and with it came the certainty that the moment of confrontation was drawing near. Her husband's plan was no longer theory, no longer whispers behind closed doors. It had flesh, voice, and a ticking clock. And though fear gnawed at her, another force pushed back harder: determination. If Charles thought she would stumble blindly into his trap, he was wrong. She knew now. She was ready. The fourth night brought storms. Clouds pressed low over the Pacific, and the wind howled through the railings like a warning. The ship pitched and rolled, its massive body surrendering to the power of the waves. Passengers retreated to their cabins, seasick or weary, leaving the decks nearly deserted. Only the hum of engines and the crash of water against steel filled the night. Linda stood alone near the stern, her coat pulled tight, her scarf whipping in the wind. She had known it would be tonight. Ethan's warning still echoed in her mind. Charles's plan required chaos, the cover of rough seas, a moment when an accident seemed plausible. She clutched the railing, her knuckles white, forcing herself to look calm even as her heart thudded. From the shadows, figures approached. 2 crewmen, men she had seen earlier working near the lifeboats, moved with too much purpose. Their eyes flicked toward her, then away, as though she were just another passenger. But their steps quickened, their path too direct. Linda turned, feigning surprise. "Is something wrong?" One of them shook his head, offering a strained smile. "Just checking safety procedures, ma'am. Best if you come with us. The storm makes this area dangerous." Her pulse spiked. This was it. She nodded, allowing them to guide her toward the far corner of the deck where the railing met open sea. The wind whipped harder, rain beginning to lash sideways, the perfect backdrop for a disappearance. behind her. She felt the shift of presence, Michael. Somewhere in the darkness, he was watching, recording, waiting for the right moment. The knowledge steadied her, even as the crewmen moved closer, too close. "Right here, ma'am," one of them said, gesturing toward the railing. His hand lingered, just a fraction too long on her arm, the grip firm, controlling. Linda forced a tremulous smile. "Oh, I see." She leaned slightly over the rail, letting her body tilt in mock vulnerability, her breath quickening with the act. "It really is slippery, isn't it?" The taller crewman exchanged a glance with his partner. He reached for her shoulder, ready to tip the balance, to let the storm finish the work. But before he could act, a sharp voice cut through the wind. "Step back!" The ship's captain, flanked by 2 security officers, emerged from the shadows, his flashlight beam slicing across the deck. At the same time, Michael appeared from the opposite side, camera raised, red light blinking as it captured every second. The crewmen froze, panic flashing in their eyes. Linda straightened, her mask of fragility falling away. She stepped back from the rail, her voice steady now. "These men were about to throw me overboard." The captain's jaw hardened. "Is that true?" he demanded, his voice a whip crack. The shorter crewman stammered. "No, sir, it's a misunderstanding. Save it," Michael cut in, his camera steady. "We have the whole thing on tape. Every word, every move. And I have your conversation with Charles Thompson recorded as well." The taller man cursed under his breath and tried to run, but the security officer seized him, wrenching his arms behind his back. The second was subdued moments later. The struggle was brief, pathetic against the strength of trained men and the authority of the captain. Linda watched it all with a strange detachment, her body trembling only after it was over. She had walked into the trap, but on her own terms. The men who thought they could erase her had been exposed under the ship's floodlights, their crime captured beyond denial. The captain turned to her, his expression grim but respectful. "Mrs. Thompson, you're safe now. We'll detain them until we reach port. The Coast Guard will be waiting." Linda nodded, her voice catching. Thank you for believing me." Michael lowered his camera and gave her the smallest nod, silent reassurance. The detained crewmen were dragged below deck, their protests lost to the roar of the storm. The captain ordered increased patrols, security tightened, and then excused himself to begin formal reports. Soon, official documents would match the recordings, building a case no one could ignore. Left alone with Michael for a moment, Linda gripped the railing again, this time for balance as the weight of what had nearly happened pressed down on her. "You played it perfectly," Michael said quietly. "If you hadn't gone along, we wouldn't have caught them in the act." Linda managed a faint smile, though her eyes glistened. "I didn't feel perfect. I felt like I was seconds away from the water." "But you weren't," he replied firmly. "You're here, and now we have everything we need." The ship rolled again, sending spray high into the air. Linda closed her eyes, letting the wind sting her face, letting herself feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She had stared her death in the eye and stepped back from the edge. Charles's plan had failed, and soon the world would know it. Back in Minneapolis, Charles Thompson poured himself a drink in the dim light of his study. The storm that had raged at sea was nothing compared to the one quietly gathering against him on land. Yet he had no idea. To him, the failed accident on the cruise was only a setback. Linda was still out there, and he still believed she would eventually stumble, that the seas or chance would do what his hired men hadn't. He leaned back in his leather chair, sipping bourbon, rehearsing the story he would tell once she was gone, a tale of heartbreak, of tragic loss. He imagined Tiffany by his side, the two of them rebuilding in the glow of sympathy and insurance money. But what he didn't know was that Linda had already moved faster than he could. The night of the attempted murder, Michael had transmitted the recordings to Rebecca Harris, who had wasted no time. With Linda's signed authorization, Rebecca delivered everything: audio files, sworn statements, notarized copies of Linda's will, to the FBI's Minneapolis field office. The Bureau had little patience for insurance fraud, and even less for attempted homicide. Within days, agents were combing through Charles's records. The financial trails he thought were hidden, offshore accounts, suspicious wire transfers, undeclared income, surfaced one by one. His so-called safety net became a noose. It began subtly: a flagged transaction at his bank, a call from a tax auditor asking about discrepancies in his returns, a colleague canceling a meeting without explanation. Charles brushed each aside, convinced they were coincidences. Then Tiffany called. "Charles," she said, her voice sharp and trembling, "what have you done?" He smiled, trying for charm. "What do you mean, sweetheart? I've done this for us. You know that." Her reply was ice. "Don't call me that. An agent came to my office today. FBI. They asked about you, about us. Do you know what that means?" He gripped the phone tighter. "It means someone's lying. They're trying to ruin me. You can't believe them." But Tiffany's voice broke, rising with panic. "They said you took out a massive policy on Linda, that you tried to cash it in already. Is that true?" "Did you really?" She stopped, breath catching. "My God, you did. You actually tried to kill her." Silence stretched between them. Charles's throat worked, searching for words, but none came fast enough. "I can't do this," Tiffany whispered. "I won't be dragged down with you." The line went dead. Charles hurled the phone across the room, the glass of bourbon spilling dark across his desk. Fury surged through him, but beneath it was something colder: fear. For the first time, the certainty that had carried him began to crack. That evening, as he left his office, two men in suits waited by his car. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. The flash of badges was enough. "Mr. Thompson," one of them said evenly, "we'd like you to come with us. There are questions about your financial records and your wife." Charles forced a laugh, tried to wave it off. "My wife? She's on vacation. What nonsense is this?" But as they guided him firmly into the back of a government sedan, the weight of reality pressed down. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something he could charm or bully his way out of. Across the ocean, Linda sat in her cabin, the hum of the ship steady beneath her feet. She gazed out at the water, the horizon streaked with pale light, and felt the faintest release in her chest. She didn't know the details yet, but she knew the walls were closing in on Charles. The evidence was already beyond his reach. His money, his mistress, his freedom, all unraveling at once. The very tools he had used to build his life of control were now the proof of his downfall. And Tiffany, she was gone. Another dream slipping through his fingers, leaving only ruin behind. Linda touched the glass of the balcony door, her reflection steady now, stronger. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Charles Thompson was collapsing. And this time, it wasn't her life hanging by a thread. It was his. The August air in Minneapolis was cooler than when Linda had left, but stepping off the plane still felt like walking into another world. A week earlier, she had been a woman marked for death. Now, she carried in her bag the weight of survival. Recordings, signed statements, bank documents, evidence strong enough to crush Charles Thompson. Her cab wound through familiar streets, past the tree-lined avenues of their neighborhood. The house rose before her, tall and neat, its windows glowing with evening light. Once she had called it home. Tonight it was a battlefield. She pushed open the front door, her suitcase rolling behind her. Charles was waiting in the living room, a glass in his hand, his face pale and tight. He looked older, somehow diminished, though he tried to muster authority with a forced smile. "You're back," he said, voice rough. "I was beginning to worry." Linda set her bag down with deliberate calm. "Were you?" His eyes flickered, catching the edge in her tone. "We've had misunderstandings. We can talk this through." Whatever you think happened on that ship, she cut him off. From her purse, she drew a slim folder and placed it on the coffee table between them. The sound was sharp, final. It's not what I think, Charles. It's what I know. He stared at it, unblinking. Inside, she continued evenly, is the recording of your hired men trying to push me overboard. Their confessions, testimonies from the crew, and the financial records Rebecca sent to the FBI. Fraud, tax evasion, insurance manipulation. It's all there. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. Linda, please. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we don't have to destroy each other. I'll give you everything. Half the business, the house, the accounts. Just don't do this. She met his gaze, her voice like steel. Half? You were ready to take all of it. My life, my children's security, my dignity. And now you're bargaining for mercy. He stepped closer, desperation bleeding through his expression. I loved you once. I still do in my own way. Let's just, and this quietly. Divorce, fine. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't drag the law into it. Linda rose, facing him fully now. For years, she had shrunk under his shadow, accepted the absence of tenderness, the careful control. But not tonight. Tonight she stood tall, unyielding. You don't get to decide anymore, she said. You plotted to kill me. You lied to everyone. You betrayed this family. There's no quiet ending for you, Charles. There's only the truth and the law. For the first time, he faltered. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him as the reality settled in. The great Charles Thompson, who thought himself untouchable, stood cornered in his own living room. I'm begging you, he whispered. Don't do this. Linda took a step forward, her eyes unwavering. I already did. As if on cue, headlights swept across the window. A knock came at the door, firm, authoritative. Charles froze. Linda turned toward the sound, her pulse steady, her decision already made. 2 agents stepped inside moments later, badges flashing, their presence filling the room with inevitability. One of them addressed her directly. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for your cooperation. We'll take it from here. Charles's face drained of color. You called them. Linda's voice was calm, almost serene. I gave them everything, and now you'll answer for what you've done. The agents guided him toward the door, his protests weak, his once commanding voice breaking into fragments. Linda stood still, watching as he was led away, her hands steady at her sides. The house was silent once more when the door shut. She exhaled slowly, the weight of years lifting from her chest. The living room around her looked the same as it always had. Same furniture, same photographs, but it no longer belonged to him. It was hers now, not as a place of fear, but as the ground where she reclaimed herself. Linda crossed to the window, watching the car pull away into the night. The man who had tried to end her life was gone, not to return. For the first time in years, the house felt safe. She touched the folder on the coffee table, the documents still inside. They were no longer her shield. They were her victory. The days that followed were unlike any Linda Thompson had known in years. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was liberating. Gone were the footsteps that once carried hidden malice, the voice that had woven control into everyday life. For the first time in decades, Linda moved freely through her home, unafraid of what lingered behind closed doors. She began with small steps, a morning walk through the neighborhood, her sneakers crunching against the gravel as the early sun painted the streets in soft gold. A stop at her favorite cafe downtown, where she ordered coffee and a croissant without glancing at the time, without worrying about Charles's scrutiny. The ordinary had become extraordinary, a celebration of her own existence. Within weeks, she returned to her old profession. The world of translation, documents, novels, contracts, welcomed her back as if she had never left. Sitting at her desk with a fresh manuscript, Linda found herself absorbed, not only in words, but in the freedom they represented. Each sentence she translated was a reminder that her life was now hers alone, unchained and unmonitored. Daniel and Sarah visited often, more attentive than ever. One Sunday afternoon, they sat around her kitchen table, the same table where fear had once silenced her. This time, the air carried only laughter and the comfort of belonging. "I can't believe how strong you were," Sarah said, eyes shining with admiration. "You faced him and you won." Linda reached across, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "I didn't feel strong. I felt terrified, but I knew I had to survive for both of you." Daniel's voice was firm, proud. "You did more than survive, Mom. You fought back. You showed us what resilience looks like." Tears pricked Linda's eyes, but they were not the tears of fear she once shed in secret. These were tears of release, of pride, of love. For years, she had worried that her children saw her as weak, trapped in a marriage that drained her spirit. Now, she realized they saw her as she truly was, a mother who had endured and risen. Evenings were peaceful again. Linda found joy in quiet rituals, watering her garden, cooking meals seasoned with her own preferences, listening to music that filled the rooms with warmth instead of tension. She no longer flinched at the sound of the door, no longer felt compelled to measure her words. The house breathed with her, alive and safe. On a clear morning not long after, she stood at her kitchen window, coffee in hand. The light spilled through the glass, touching her hair, her face, her reflection in the pane. Outside, the world stretched wide and open. Children rode bikes along the sidewalk, neighbors waved as they tended lawns, and the sun cast promise across the horizon. Linda closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her. This was not the life Charles had planned for her. It was the one she had reclaimed, piece by piece, with courage and with truth. Behind her, a framed photo of Daniel and Sarah sat on the counter. They had been her anchor, her reason to fight, and now they were her reward. She smiled, her heart full. The past was scarred, yes, but it no longer held her captive. Ahead lay a future of her own design, one built not on fear but on freedom. Linda opened her eyes to the sunlight, lifted her coffee, and breathed deeply. A new chapter had begun,